Hello, everyone. This is kind of impromptu. I'm not typically someone to record video. When it comes to these things, in the past years of me recapping my favorite books I've read in the year, I usually just do posts on Instagram, a picture or so, and that kind of does it. But I find that it's a little bit of a mess to compare. You're seeing an image, you're seeing text, it's on a story, it's kind of a mess. So what I want to do is I want to try my hand at trying to record a video, see how it goes. I'm using my headphones, so hopefully the audio quality is not terrible, but it seems to be better than the laptop. I'm using my webcam. This is very Zoom vacation quality. How about that? Let's go back and pretend we're not expected to be in an office. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my favorite books that I read this year. I just a little bit background for some of you people who maybe don't follow me. Maybe you're just stumbling across this video. Welcome. I am someone who reads. I try to read a variety of books, but it really comes down to modern nonfiction. I would say a lot of 60s, 70s stuff, a lot of 20s, 30s stuff in terms of fiction. Not as much this year, though. I don't know if there's anything in my list I'm going to talk about today that's more 20s, 30s fiction. Lots of postmodern stuff. When it comes to modern fiction, it's mostly postmodern. So if those are your kind of things, get ready. It'll be a fun time. Decent amount of sci-fi in there too. When it comes to 60s, 70s era, that really seems to be where I gravitate towards when it comes to reading. And yeah, so we're gonna get into it. This year, I only read 33 books, which for a lot of people online, that is nothing. But those people are also counting a lot of audiobooks. And you know what? I listen to a lot of music. I don't have the time to be listening to audiobooks. There's nothing wrong with that. You got a limited time on this earth. You can listen to audiobooks. It's just you're not reading a book. And sometimes audiobooks are a better way of consuming stories. You know, if you're reading a memoir, probably it's better to hear it from the guy or the girl who's reading it. So without further ado, we're going to get into it. Like I said, 33 books. Most years I get in the 30s when it comes to reading. This year it's a little bit lower, but I read a lot of big books this year. We're going to talk about a handful of them. I'm going to start with what I got from the library. All right, I'm going to try to adjust the headphone. Hopefully that does not mess with audio. I really would recommend do not listen to this on headphones. I can already expect it to be a bit of a nightmare. And I'm hoping to fix this in the future. So we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to start with, I have two books that I do not have in person with me right here today. And those are from our good old Chicago Public Library system. And so without further ado, I'm going to start with the first one. It's the first 5-star book I read this year. Like I said, 33 books this year. Only 10 of them were 5-star reads in terms of what you would record on like one of these GoodReads or whatever kind of apps or websites. And yeah, so to start it off, first one is Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of Tech Billionaires by Douglas Rushkoff. And so Douglas Rushkoff, he's been around for a couple decades. I've never read a book from him before. I actually have one. There's the bookshelf. You know, you guys, it's always important, right? You got to have books in the background. You can't just be a guy talking on the internet. I have a book of his on the shelf right there. It's called Siberia. It was his first book he ever put out. It came out in 1994, and it talks about a lot of early internet, cyberpunk kind of. You know, it's only like 2 years after Snow Crash came out, so it's really of that era. I still need to read that. I'm hoping to read that next year. This book is his most recent, and you can find a lot of good interviews with him or different discussions or talks, like TED Talk kind of stuff with him about all the different eras of books he's written, because he's written books from 1994 up until now. This most recent one, I was watching some videos from him promoting this book, and I found it very interesting. So what the deal is with Survival of the Richest is he was asked by these tech billionaires, or some sort of billionaire, to do a discussion, and he does all these discussions all the time. But it was, instead of in an auditorium, it was just in it was on a private island or something like that. I don't remember the exact details, and he does a better job of discussing it. So if this sounds interesting, please go check him out. What he ended up on a private island talking to maybe 2 or 3 other billionaires with this guy. And he was just trying to answer questions. You know, he's used to this kind of stuff. But all the questions they were asking him were like, so I've got this escape plan. I'm going to go to Alaska, or I'm going to go to New Zealand. How do I weather out the apocalypse really? And he was like blown away that these are the questions they were asking. Like, you have all the money in the world, you have the influence, are you not like you have the power to like do something in our world today, and you're just gonna run away? He didn't tell that to those guys, but it inspired this book essentially. So it's a good book. It's very of the times, very 2020s, which is very different than what a lot of what I read. This came out in I think October or September, like fall 2022. So it's still relatively new. I would highly recommend this to anyone who's interested in the concept of billionaires in our modern age, tech bros, tech billionaires. Everyone has opinions on these guys. They got opinions on Zuck. Boy, I got a lot of opinions if you follow me on Instagram. And how you got Elon. Don't even use Twitter anymore. So it's I think everyone has opinions, whether it be good or bad, about these guys. So like, it's an interesting subject to study for sure. I without further more to talk about, I think it's a good exploration of those kinds of themes. The only other library book I have, and I'm going to try to put these on the screen too if I haven't already, is Black Punk Now by, well, it's not necessarily authored, it's more organized by James Spooner and Chris Altieri. This is what I have been describing, I just read this month, a book-length zine. So I read a lot of music books. I'm a big music guy. I'm not impressed with a lot of music books. And I think most of them are like glorified Wikipedia articles. Like you could just go on Wikipedia and read about like whatever band, whatever artist, whatever time period. You're going to get that information. You don't need to read a book about it. You don't need a book on your shelf to prove that you read. If you read, that's good enough. Just be fine with the records on your shelf if you're a music guy and you're not a book guy. It's fine. So, but this book, I was really blown away with it. It just came out in October this year. And it is, like I said, a book-length zine. So it has a fiction, it's got nonfiction, and it's also got like comics. It's a lot of mixed media. So it's like some graphic design or graphic novel elements. It's got transcripts from scripts and interviews, some lyrical breakdowns, stuff like that. It's just a lot. It's just trying to combine all the ideas of a community into one, and I think it's perfectly done. Like I said, Black Punk Now. It is, I think 300 pages, something like that. It was very entertaining because I'm not a graphic novel guy. I usually am not like, I read a lot of short story collections and I'm not into them front to back. And I'm not going to say I'm like into this front to back, but it was a really interesting collaboration of ideas, I should say, where some stories are much more stronger than others, but they all paint the picture of what it means to be black punk. And as you can tell, I am not a black punk. I spend a lot of time in the live music scene. I've been, keeping up with the hardcore scene recently. Chicago's got a great hardcore scene. I actually went and saw a tour, which if you read my GoodReads review, you get like a pretty good background on all this. In the fall, Soul Glow and Zulu and Playtime all did a tour together. Now those are all black punk bands, and that's the thing. You're lucky. Like, there's a lot of variety and diversity in the punk community. Like, I am way more blown away with it than I am the indie community. I grew up, going to shows in the DIY Chicago, like garage rock and indie stuff, and it's a lot of white art school kind of types. I'm not saying I'm any better or any different, but that was definitely the defining factor in all these bands. So when I go to a hardcore show in Chicago, it's miraculous. You'll have band of all guys, all Latino guys from the south side of Chicago, from like Little Village and Pilsen, stuff like that. That's Sidio Scary. That's a great band. You've got like plenty of black punk bands. Biggest one right now, I'd say Buggin', who also played on that show. They're a Chicago band, but they were not on that tour. Of course, there's all sorts of different varieties, whether it be like trans fronted or queer fronted in general. There's just there's all these different intersections of different people, and they all come together for this one kind of music. So this book it focuses around black punk and what that means. So it's it's people who have been in bands, people who are like scene members, whether it be photographers or people hosting shows or hosting DIY venues, stuff like that. It's a really great exploration of that, and it's a really great exploration of the times. It also does not talk down to you. Like I said, a lot of these music books are glorified Wikipedia articles. So it's like say you're a fan of, like, I don't know, whatever. I read a book earlier this year about Jesus Mary Chain. If you're a fan of that band, you probably know the basics about it. You don't need a descriptor of who they are or whatever. I mean, could help, but if you just only focus on the basics, it's like, what am I getting out of this? In this book, like, it doesn't hold your hand. It asks, it hopes that you already know the basics of black punk. It hopes that you know the story of Bad Brains. You're already, like, well aware of Bad Brains. You know who the band Death is from Detroit from the early 70s. You know who, I'm going to forget it now, Pure Hell, the story of Pure Hell, which I didn't even know until, I think, this year or last year, something like that. And I'm a pretty big music guy. So, like, it expects you to know the lineage and history of black punk. This is just kind of an update and what it means to be a black punk. And I found that to be just really inspiring, how to see, how to create a book like that. All right, we're already talking way too long about all this stuff. Time to get into the actual books, and I'm going to grab some water real quick. If I didn't explain already, I am not doing this in order, although I'll save the last 3 as my top 3. First off, we got, right here, Kathy Acker's New York City in 1979. It is one of those Penguin Moderns. This is number 27. I bought a couple of these. I was in Canada this year, in Vancouver, and I was really impressed. And all the great bookstores, they had a lot of great British editions, a lot of great stuff I don't normally see here in Chicago. And this one is really, it's a little bit of a mixed media thing. Let me see if I can pull up a page that's a little different. You'll get a little bit of photography or something like that in here. It's only 47 pages. I'm not someone who, even if it's a short book, reads them in one sitting, but I read this in one sitting, like in the morning before work. This is my first time reading a Kathy Acker book, too. She is highly influenced by William S. Burroughs. This, like I said, it came out, I think, in the early 80s, if it takes place in 1979. And she's very, like I said, influenced by William S. Burroughs. I am rereading Naked Lunch right now, and that's a favorite book of mine. This feels very in line with that. Kathy Acker, learning a little bit of her background. She spent some time as a working girl on the street in the 60s, and kind of brings that influence into the story. And it's a short excerpt, but it's very visceral. I've never read descriptions of sex in a way that she has, and I'm very interested to read more from her. So that's my hope for next year, is to read more Kathy Acker. Next up, we got, and I read this just last month, Titus Ground by Mervyn Peake. Isn't this a beautiful cover? I have now all of the Ballantine covers, or Ballantine editions for the other books in the trilogy. I was looking all summer because I wanted to read this book. I heard about the Gorman Gas series last year. This is a fantasy series. This one came out in 1946. Most people seem to know about this. I don't know. People my age don't really know about it, because every time I bring it up, everyone's like, "Wow, how did I never know about that?" I grew up, big fan of Lord of the Rings, and nothing tops Lord of the Rings. Still nothing tops Lord of the Rings. I've only ever read Volume 1 so far, the Gorman Gas trilogy, and I was really impressed. It's very descriptive. It's very slow too. It's very much like Lord of the Rings. If you're a fan of Lord of the Rings, the book. Like the experience of reading Lord of the Rings, I would highly recommend checking out Gorman Ghast if you have not already. The greatest explanation I've come across so far is that Lord of the Rings is about a big, vast world and a big adventure. But the Gorman Ghast trilogy is more about one castle. It's called Gorman Ghast, and it's just different scenes taking place in different parts of this castle. And that is a really great thing. It's just done really well. They don't write books like this anymore. Mervyn Peake, he was an illustrator too. Not to keep showing off pictures and whatnot. Let me see, where is it in here? But he drew all the pictures that are in this book, which is really crazy. We've got like these really great sketches, which I think there's a Penguin edition where those are the covers. You don't often come across an author who's as good an author as they are a illustrator. So that's where I'll leave it at that. I'm about to start book 2, hopefully, in the next week or two. They're great for reading in the fall and winter because it's so insular. You're in a castle. It's very atmospheric. It feels very in line with wanting to curl up in the winter. So, really recommend it. Next up, we got Philip K. Dick's Time Out of Joint. Never read this before. I wasn't actually planning on reading that this year. I've been trying to read one Philip K. Dick book a year and going through the bigger ones first. One of my friends, he's a bigger Phil K. Dick fan than I am, probably watching this, shouts out, handed me this book. He's got a little bit less of a attachment to the physical copy than I do, and said, "Hey, you should check this one out." Did not sell it very well. Said it was kind of one of the other, like, they've read a lot more than I have of Phil K. Dick, so maybe they got something to it, but I was blown away with this one. It's I did not know where it was going to go the whole time. It's from 1959. It's one of his earlier novels, and it really feels like I've read stuff later than this before, and I've read short stories from this time period from him, and I was just like kind of impressed that like I've read a lot of sci-fi that's from this time period and later, and I just felt like this is miles ahead. Typical Phil K. Dick. If you've ever glossed over this one, you want to read the big ones instead, or if you only read the big ones, you've only read like Electric Sheep or Ubik or whatever. I still haven't read Ubik. I think that's next year. I would recommend checking out this one. It's very much a subversion of the 50s suburban world, which we've seen a lot of times in the decades since the 50s, but this was written in 1959. Like he was doing that cliche probably first, and still better than most of the other people. Next up, we've got Arabesques by Anton Shamas. This is it's a beautiful cover. This is NYRB. They just put this out this year. One of the few I didn't read that many NYRBs this year, but they just put this out this year. This came out originally in 1986, and then originally translated in English in 1988. And the interesting thing is, so this is by a Palestinian Christian author. If you've been following me, you know that I am also a Palestinian Christian ancestry. It's been an interesting time recently, let's just say that. This book was written in Hebrew, and that's the interesting thing about it. This was originally written in Hebrew. This is written, Anton Shamas is someone who went to an integrated school growing up in, whatever you want to call it. I'm not gonna. I'm exhausted by this conversation already. So he grew up seeing both sides of this world, and of course, being a Christian in the middle of it, like people ignore you, people don't understand that you even exist. It's a whole thing. This picture, like I would recommend you could get the original, not original, but like the last time pressed in like the 2000s in English. But this one, the cover actually is related to the story, because this picture right here is a picture of his family, and it's described in the book. So I would highly recommend getting this in NYRB. And the interesting thing is, so it's split into two parts. It's called the tale and the teller. The tale is his familial tale that goes from like the last 100 years or so. This was written in the 80s, like I said. So from like, I guess maybe 1920 to 1980, just describing the family, describing the different generations, what they've gone through, the political changes that happened during that time, and how they weathered that. There's one section in here that describes the Nakba that I think is one of the main reasons you should be reading this book. But beyond that, there's so much more to this book. I read this in February when it came out, so I'm trying to remember a little bit more about it, but it is more than just a familial tale. That familial tale aspect is very influenced by Borges. I would say that, describing the Nakba in that time period in a very folklorish, Borgesian way is no small feat, and it's really interesting, and I really respect that. But it's also like it really is surprising, because that stuff is not that old, but it makes it feel like it's ancient folklore in the way that he's describing it. Beyond that, though, there's the tale. Now, the tale is a section that is it takes place in the United States, and it takes place in Iowa at a writers' conference. Maybe like the Iowa Writers' Conference. For some of you people in the know. And it brings in all these different authors from all over the country, or all over the world, I should say. You've got like European authors, you've got Arabic authors, you've got Israeli authors, and they all are coming to this one area, and they're all intermingling, having disagreements or whatever else. There's a lot to be. It's a little bit more allegorical, this section, and it's something that, like, I think a lot of the discussion around this book is analyzing this section of it. Yeah, it was just, there's a lot to it. I've seen so many book recommendations go around about books from Palestinian authors. No one's talking about this one, and it just came out this year. People should be talking to me. NYRB isn't even talking about this, and maybe there's some politics behind that. I don't know. They really haven't promoted it since it came out, but I really recommend that one. On to more NYRB. Boy, this is gonna be a hard one to carry and pick up. We've got Anniversaries, Volume 1. Volume 2. This is the longest book I've ever read. This is a 1,700-page, almost, story. Let's see if I can kind of, like, that's how big it is. 2 volumes. It is a diary entry. It's a fictional diary entry. This is by Uwe Johnson, by the way. Fictional diary entries of a woman named Gesine Crespal, and she is a German who came to New York with her daughter in the 1960s. So beyond being of Palestinian ancestry, I'm also of German ancestry. My family lineage follows this story very similarly, and that's kind of why I picked it up. My grandmother is only a couple years, 2 to 4 years older than Gesine in this book, from a different part of Germany, but came to the United States in the 50s and after the war. And then my mother was born, and she's born, I think, a year before her daughter Marie in this book. So it feels very in line with my family lineage, what I've been hearing about, or what I've heard growing up and whatnot, except, New York for Chicago, stuff like that. It's a very interesting story. I read it day by day because it's daily entries. Every day, it's anywhere between, let's say, like a paragraph to a 10 pages, something like that, per day. So I read it day by day. I started it in August of last year and then finished it in August of this year. And I think that's a good way of reading it. You could also just read it like a book and read it as you go in chunks. People seem to enjoy that too, but you take a couple months to do that, whereas this, you could read it throughout a year. You read other books. And it cuts back and forth between 1930s Germany, small town, whatever, to New York City in the 60s, and it kind of compares the two. It talks about like all the big events. This is 1967 to 1968 every day, so all of the historical real events of that time period. You talk about like assassinations of MLK, Robert Kennedy, those are in here, and then it culminates with the Prague Spring, and it's in a really interesting way, and that fits the narrative. So I highly recommend that one too. It's a little bit of a slow burn. I know a lot of people who've given up on the book when they try to read it, and in that sense, it's hard because it's a slow burn. The first couple months, if you're reading it day by day, you're only getting like 200 pages into the book, so you're like, really, when am I getting into this? Like, how do I really get through this? Like I said, a lot of that, the personal connection, felt kind of what was guiding me, and maybe a little bit of the bias on why I like it so much. But I would definitely read it again, and that's the thing. Like, this is by far the longest book I've ever read. I wouldn't read it anytime soon, but I highly recommend it. It's not a cheap one, but I know Open Books here in Chicago, which you can buy online and ships all over the country, sells them for like $12.50 each of these volumes. So for $25, it's well worth it. All right, now we're on to the top 3. I'm gonna try to keep these in order. Not that there's really that much order, but I will preface, these are all postmodern books. One is more modern in the sense that it came out in the last 10 years. The other 2 came out in the golden age of postmodernism of the late 60s, early 70s. Maybe you can guess what they are. If you follow me online, you probably already know. We're going to start it off with The Manifold Destiny of Eddie Vegas by Rick Harsch. If you are around in these circles on the internet, you probably know who Rick Harsch is. You've seen his videos. Maybe they're recommended. This way, the video's going to be flipped, so it's off to the side. Maybe they're recommended next to it. He's a fun character, definitely worth checking out. On this channel, actually, I have a reading from this book that I did over the summer when I read through it. And it's really interesting. So last year I read American the Cult of Cactus Boots, A Diagnostic, which is an amazing book by Philip Friedenberg. And in the book, a big influence of it is Eddie Vegas over here. And what... so it inspired me. I got to read all the stuff that's related to this book. So I thought maybe I'll just read this, see how it goes. But it is honest, standalone on its own, well worth checking out. Rick Harsch, you follow him online, you get a semblance of who he is and what he thinks. Him on paper is a whole different story. It's very interesting. It's very well done. Once speaking of the Iowa Writers Conference, he's one of those guys. If you really are into that. And let me see what else I can describe about it. I described it in my review, and maybe I was being a little facetious because I don't, or not facetious, but overindulgent because I don't really read a lot of modern fiction books. I describe this as the American novel of the 21st century, or at least the best one. I'm not going to say it's not. In my eyes, it is. But I also don't read a lot of those books, so don't take my word for it. What happens here is he describes from the 1800s, from the times of the Oregon Trail and Lewis and Clark, all the way up to modern day, pretty much 2015, of the Xbox controller in the arms of a drone bomb operator that kind of thing. You know, the Obama world that we at the time we're living in. And now we're still kind of living in. What really is miraculous about this book? He's a great writer. The wordplay in here is astounding. Some of my favorite words were phantasmagoriflage is one that stuck with me this whole time. And then Manly Hattons was another one that I thought was funny. I flipped to a random page before I even started this book, and I landed on that word, and I thought it was so funny. He's just it's a fun read. It's a dark read. It's an important read. It's not without its flaws for sure, but the word, like if you're someone who's into like a well-crafted word of a story, absolutely check out Eddie Vegas. No longer have to order it from Slovenia. You can get it from Zero Gram Press, so I know you can get it online pretty easy. I also described it as a Tom Clancy book for people who are appalled by the world of a Tom Clancy book. Now, I used to read a lot of Tom Clancy books back when I was younger. In my younger days, early teen years, I was playing a lot of first-person shooter games, and when it's independent reading time, I'd read a lot of Tom Clancy books. I don't know why they let me do that. It's kind of funny nowadays, seeing who I am now, but I am a little terrified by the idea of someone else being like that. But yeah, I would describe it as such. It's he describes things. It's very high. The dark military aspects of today's world. There's a faction in this book that is based off of Blackwater, and he describes all that. And like I said, it goes from this huge timeline of Americana. He describes like 150 pages in this book. He describes, without saying it, the towers, the smoke off the Twin Towers, the pillowing smoke, and compares that to, for all my Midwestern bar attendees, the sign, Ham's beer sign, where they always have from the land of the sky blue water, these waterfalls. They pillow down into this luscious God's country of Wisconsin. It's miraculously done. I had to stop when I read that, and like I said, I'm not doing it justice by barely describing something I read like 7 months ago. That is I had to stop in my tracks and reread that. Like, what did I just read? And I haven't done that with another book, really. It's miraculous. I'm really excited to read other stuff by Rick Harsh, especially more of his Wisconsin-based stuff. And yeah, so we'll leave it at that. I could talk forever about Eddie Vegas. Next up, I just finished this month too. It's In Transit by Bridget Brophy. This is a Dalkey Archive book, very underrated. Came out, I think, in 2002 from Dalkey Archive, but originally came out in 1969. Bridget Brophy is a Irish author, although she had most of her success in the UK back in the day. She was, as the intro explains, described as the brainiest woman in the UK, which is, of course, a little bit of a diminutive title, because why would you describe a man that way? But as you can tell from the cover, there's a lot of stuff about intransience and gender, and that's exactly what it is. It talks about the transientness of language, of gender, of syntax. This book is one of those postmodern books where you flip to a page, and of course now I'm going to take forever to find it. It's got little diagrams, or if I can find, there's a really good section that it will show up on the camera really well. Where is it? Something like this. You're getting text not the way that you normally get it, which is the great thing about postmodernism. What happens in this book? It takes place in an airport, and it describes the transient nature of an airport. The fact that an airport, it's not a home, it's not a destination, it is a conduit. You start at home, and you go to your vacation spot, or you start at your vacation spot, or your work trip, or whatever it might be, your friend's house. You get in the airport, and you get back home, whatever it might be. And everyone else in the airport's doing that too. No one goes there every day unless you work there at a kiosk to the same spot every day and expect the same thing to happen. And even if you go and you work there, I'm sure every day is a little bit different. Although, like any job, it probably gets mundane. So what happens is, this whole airport thing is described. Then you get to section 2. There's 4 sections of this book. And the character finds out, or they come to the realization, I don't know what gender I am. And they're trying to use all these different signifiers. They're looking at like what other people are wearing. They are looking at social cues, whatever it might be. And of course, this is 1969 too, where it's a little bit more strictly put. So they're using lots of different social signifiers, and of course it's 1969, so they're a little bit more apparent than today, but it is not that dated. Like I said, I read a lot of sci-fi and absurdist experimental literary stuff from this time period, and it's, I love a lot of that. I think it's a really great time period in writing, but it's not always great for commentary on gender or race or sexuality, and I think this does it really well. So what happens is you go through the whole book. There's a lot of wacky hijinks. This book, like I said, came out 1969, still somewhat early compared to a lot of the classics of postmodernism. It feels very Pynchonian, and so that is like part of the fun of it, but then the syntax and the language in here is also very similar to the Rick Harsh, Eddie Vegas, in the sense that it's a lot of fun wordplay. There's just a lot of creativity here. It's only 200 pages, so it's a little bit easier to follow, I'd say, than reading a giant 600-page postmodern maximalist novel. And like I said, it's underrated. I want to read more Bridget Brophy. I want to hopefully have other people read more of these stories. I think this is one of her more postmodern works, but she was someone who was big on animal rights. She was big on equality, stuff like that, like very ahead of her time. So I want to know more. So I'll leave it at that. Finally, and you can probably guess what it is if you know what I've been reading. It's Gravity's Rainbow. Unfortunately, I got to be that guy. I mean, I don't know how you can read Gravity's Rainbow for the first time and enjoy it and not have it be number one, especially, like I said, when I describe how much I like stuff in the 60s and 70s, postmodern stuff. There's so much of what I like that is influenced by this book. I've read other Pynchon. I read V this year as well. Didn't quite make the top 10. And it's just, this book has been sitting on my shelf since early 2017, and unread. It's the longest unread book I had owned. I had tried it multiple times, failed multiple times. I bought this when I was in college when I was not really a reader. And it's funny to think that, because now it's still not an easy read. And like I said, I read it within maybe 3 months, something like that. I'll just keep it to the commentary that I think this is the quintessential postmodern book. I most certainly did not understand most of it. I did not understand enough of it to aptly describe it to you right now. But I will say that it does a really good job of taking the concept of World War II, which is still in our minds probably the biggest historical event, and completely subverting it. It's since 1945, and even before then, you think about like the Great Dictator, stuff like that. World War II has been commercialized in such a way in pop culture to this day that it almost means nothing. Like, you think about it, but how much do you actually know the actual history of the people who were living through it, whether they be soldiers, whether they be victims of the Holocaust, whether they be just civilians living during that time period, and then compare that to all the different movies, video games, board games, Pulp Fiction books or comics or whatever else. The narrative of World War II has been greatly skewed to the point where I don't think anyone really knows a lot of like what truly happened and whatnot. And I just think it's really interesting that I think he was the first one to really talk about that, the subversive nature of it. Like I said, pop culture, it already existed. You already had the glorification of soldiers in ways that, like, maybe they weren't all such glorious soldiers, even on the Allies, stuff like that. It's war. It's a difficult time, and a lot of terrible things happen, done by a lot of people. I'm not trying to excuse anything. I'm just saying that it's not a black and white situation as all conflicts are. And I think he lambasts it in such an interesting way where he makes the villains, who aren't really the villains that we typically talk of, but when he does talk about Nazis, they're comedic, almost laughable, like Disney villains. And then when he talks about the Americans or the British or any allies, they're not the glorious heroes. They're bumbling idiots. They're just described in whatever. They're just kind of like stumbling through the story, really. And so I think that's a really interesting analysis of it. And like I said, I'm missing most of it. I'd love to reread it again. I can't reread it right now. I'm gonna take a break from Pynchon. I think next year I'm not gonna read anything from him, and then I'm gonna probably read like Bleeding Edge or something. So to leave it at that, I hope you were able to watch through all this. I hope it wasn't unlistenable, unwatchable. If you enjoyed, please let me know. It was interesting to try to record for 40 minutes straight, and I'm hoping to cut it down to something that's not that long. I just thought this was a much easier way than having to write out all my thoughts. So, yeah, leave it at that. Have a happy new year. Let me know what you read and if there's any recommendations. Thanks. Bye.